Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Jeff Foundation's special World Awareness Day webinar series. I'm so excited to have you all with us, and just personally want to say Happy Ocean Awareness Day. I'm so excited to be able to share this event with over 400 of you. It's going to be a great day, and I love seeing all your photos of your decorations, activity kits, and Stronger Than Duchenne posts and family photos again. Well, with that being said, we have again a special guest with us here, Dr. Han Fons from the Rare Disease Research Unit, who will be presenting on advancements in drug development and FDA-approved therapies in Duchenne. We'll be opening questions and comments after the presentation, so please feel free to make sure to drop any questions you may have in the chat section below. With that being said, again, we are so excited to have all of you join us and hope you enjoy this educational webinar. So I'll pass it over to you, Dr. Han, to begin.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon, and welcome everyone to our clinical research updates on this very special day of Duchenne Awareness Day. I appreciate your time and commitment to clinical research and trials and all of your commitment and dedications to your child. So this is a brief, and I'll leave enough questions at the end in order to get to everyone. So I would like to keep my presentation very brief so we have enough time. So thank you again for having me, Jet Foundation. So if anyone who is savvy enough, and which I'm sure all of you guys are, able to get on clinicaltrial.gov and able to navigate the site, if you're able to put in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and with the country being US, what you get is roughly about 175 studies. That's really impressive. We've come a long way. About 12 years ago, there was maybe a handful of studies focusing on Duchenne. So I'm very proud to see these numbers. However, if you then filter out your search into those that are actively opened or in recruitment phase, there's approximately 24 studies. Even though this number is relatively big, and it's nice to see, I think we still have plenty of rooms for improvement and more studies to be available for our children. It all begins and things have changes in 2016. I guess with COVID, Zika virus has now no longer been the case, but events that changes in 2016 first began with the approval of eteplirsen, and this was approved in September 19, 2016. And with this approval, it has opened up a lot of opportunities and a lot of doors for other therapies and other trials to open, begin, and gain attractions. Then in 2020, we will not discuss about 2019 as we know what happened in 2019. But again, in 2020, Emflaza was then approved. And then also again in 2021, casimersen as well as golodirsen, both of which has been approved. So to date, we have one that I have missed is Viltepso. So now we have 4 approved therapies that are available to our patients in our community. Some of the challenges and trials are always present. However, because of the dedications of our family and commitment, it is only then that we have these approvals that are available to us. Therefore, it requires quite substantial amount of work and effort on everyone's part. But as a physician and a principal investigator in a number of studies, what I've seen in some of the trial participation barriers are numerous. First begins with financial. Of course, your parent or your mom or dad has to miss work. If there is a sibling involved, There's always child care cost that needs to be accounted for. And also, of course, transportations. You know, some family drive, some family flies. But what happens if you're the driver and your car breaks down? What happens if you're driving and something happens along the way? As far as childcare, what happens if childcare falls through? We do have a number of families who actually bring their sibling into the clinic when they do participate in clinical trials. So there's a lot of innovative ways that the families have been able to maneuver and circumvent just to make the situation tolerable. One family would always get a Chick-fil-A, and that was their treat for every time they come into clinic. I think you know who you are. And so, you know, I think you just have to make the best of it. In addition to financial and obstacles and transportation obstacles, there's also the complexity of study design as well. So in any given study, there is a protocol that outlines certain clinic visits. And depending on the study, for example, some of the atypicals, exon skipping studies require frequent infusion and therefore frequent visit to the clinic. And that really is a huge burden in the long run. And if you consider doing this for 2-3 years, that is substantial effort and commitment on everybody's part. And of course, whether your child's on steroids or not determines your ability to enter the study. Another thing you need to consider is, of course, the placebo arm. Some of the study, such as the ones that are approved recently with casimersen and golodirsen, it requires 2 months of placebo control arm. I'm sorry, 2 years. So imagine if you come to clinic every single week for infusion, and you know, of course, you don't know whether it's placebo or treatment, but there is that chance of getting a placebo treatment for about 2 years. So those are things that are a little bit harder to grasp for a lot of the family, and a lot of family are challenging to accept something as such. But you know, you guys tough it up and have able to work through it. So I really commend you and everyone for that. The other thing that you need to consider, of course, is the criteria in which to consider a patient included or excluded from the study. So the first thing is, of course, always the age, right? Whether the child is a certain age confer a functional outcome or functional status. Mutation is also, genetic mutation is also an inclusion, or it could be an exclusion criteria for any given clinical trials. And of course, now with gene therapy, you also consider, is my child positive or negative for viral titers? So all of these are very important, but also can be a challenge or obstacles for anyone or any family to be enter into this study. So this is a diagram that was published in 2017. So this is about 4 years ago. A lot of these have been and continue to be true to this day. There are a number of targets that drug therapy can be used and can be implemented in order to improve functional outcome and to improve dystrophin expression, or to improve muscle strength by lessening inflammation, regenerations, and lessening fibrosis. So there's a number of targets, as you can see. Some of them, as I've crossed out, are those who have been tried, and in some ways or another, either it did not meet primary endpoint measure, or the study stopped due to lack of efficacy or some other reasons. Fortunately, there's still a handful of studies that are ongoing currently. Givinostat from Italo Pharmaco help reduces inflammation. Same thing with Ramoilon, that is also ongoing, both of which have been shown to reduce inflammation, and with that, and hope to improve and maintain muscle stability. There's also Fibrogen, which is also very useful and helpful in fibrosis and hindrance. So it helps to improve and lessen or reduce the severity of muscle fibrosis in the heart and in the lungs and in other muscles as well from the body, and therefore lessen or reduce the muscle function and the loss of functions of muscle. There's a number of other anti-fibrotic agents that has been used in the past, but Fibrogen has been a leading contender. There are other exon skipping therapy as well, as you can see from the very top, to restore dystrophin expression. A lot of these dystrophin restoration therapy has been successful in gaining FDA approval. The first one is, of course, eteplirsen that was approved in 2016, followed by casimersen, golodirsen, and viltepso that was recently approved earlier this year. So this is again another summary of table that has majority of the ongoing study in Duchenne muscular dystrophy at this time. And you can see givinostat from Italo Pharmaco, Fibrogen, monoclonal antibody to help reduce fibrosis. Capricor is thinking about starting a new study soon. I'm hoping to see that, and that's targeting cardiac tissue. Of course, there also is gene therapy, which is promising, but meanwhile, we have several approved exon skipping therapy. So exon 51, 45, as well as 53, all have been granted approval for very specific therapies. And you can see as many studies that we have successfully gained approval, there are also some that are either lack of efficacy or stopped due to other reasons. So talking about some of the gene therapy, and I'll go over it briefly. There are 3 different sponsors that are currently in the field of gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. There is Sarepta, and this slide is, I copied this from their investor presentation that's on their webpage, so you do have access to this in case you want to take a look at it more closely. But what they have shown is that from their 11 patients, the varying age from 4 to 7 years of age, the gene therapy is, of course, IV infusion, and for the first 12 weeks, patient undergo muscle biopsy, then to open label extension. And what they have seen is that based on those patients, there has been seen an increase in dystrophin expression with muscle biopsy. Pfizer phase 1 result, based on the immunofluorescent muscle biopsy, showed also increase in dystrophin expression at 2 months at a low dose, and also at a higher dose, they also have a higher expression and percentages. In Solid Biosciences, where you have patients from 5 to 14 years of age, there was some clinical hold secondary to severe adverse effect. However, their clinical outcome measure with North Star Ambulatory as well as 6-minute walk test did show that there is a maintain and some slight improvement in North Star Ambulatory for these patients. As for a 6-minute walk test, there seems to be some improvement, both in low dose as well as in high dose. So I had to give a very brief and short presentation on clinical trials update for Duchenne's, with the hopefully leaving us some time to have an open discussions and ask questions. So I'll stop here and I'll open up the forum for discussion. So Danielle and Corey, I don't know if anyone else is on here and if they have any questions.
Hi, Dr. Han. Here goes. Here we go. Sorry, they just take a second, I think, to load in. So now a bunch are coming through.
Okay.
How is recruitment going for the studies?
You know, I'm always impressed. So, for example, for our Fibrogen study, we have currently enrolled about 10 patients for the non-ambulatory study and 2 patients for the ambulatory study. All of our patients are either from sort of Southeast regional or they're flying in from other places, but it's just, you know, it's an every 2 weeks infusion, and the level of commitment and dedications from the family is enormous.
Could you speak to the dosing in clinical trials and the adverse events observed?
For which study?
There's not, wasn't a certain study, it just says, could you speak to the dosing? Maybe
Sure.
like the dosing in the drugs though, in each, if you wanna, sorry, take that
Sure,
one.
sure. So for the Sarepta Essence study, for the casimersen and golodirsen, the side effect, the SAE or the AE for those study has been minimal at our site and has been minimal across different sites. You know, there's always different AEs, and it's hard to completely determine whether it's drug related or it could happen anyway, even if you're not in the study. You know, just common ailments such as nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and those kind of things. But as far as what we can see from our site, some of the side effects are fever that typically goes away with a dose of Motrin or Tylenol. Some patient did complain of just some shivers and shakings, but all of those are fairly minor and typically resolve on its own. So for the most of the exon skipping therapy trials, there hasn't been too much adverse events that we could identify or report it. For the Fibrogen study, everyone has been doing well on this study. We fortunately has not had any serious AE that is drug related. We had one patient who broke his leg, but other than that, everyone who had been receiving and has been in this study has not had any AEs. Of course, you know, we don't know who's getting what, but so far, everyone seems to be tolerating the infusion well, and there has been no adverse events.
Okay, so I think, so now it's going to the dosing referred to the dose levels in the gene therapy trials.
Got it, got it. So some of the side effects that you probably have heard about in various gene therapy studies are immune response, complex activation, and that could potentially affect the kidney or other important organs. It appears that from the data from Solid, Pfizer, as well as Sarepta, all of the patients who had suffered any sorts of adverse event have recovered. And I don't believe there has been any ongoing serious adverse events. But you're right, it does appear that the higher dose tend to have slightly more adverse events to report.
Okay, I think this will kind of lead into the next question we have. What happens when there isn't an adverse event?
Oh,
Probably just speaking for general trials, not just gene therapy.
yeah. So depending on the study, some study do have that double-blind placebo control arm that we are not privy to know. I don't even know. So if there's no AEs, then it's a good sign. And if there's no AE, then potentially that could mean that you're on the placebo arm, but there's no guarantee, and no one really knows except for those who randomize the patients. So it's double blind because the patient doesn't know that whether they're on treatment or not, and I don't know whether they're on treatments or not. And this is applicable across different sites as well. Patients does not know whether they're on it or not for those studies that require placebo arms, and neither would there be with their principal investigator.
Okay. How does enrollment affect the overall DMD study landscape?
About maybe 10, 12 years ago, there isn't this much trials to pick from. And only a small subset of patients are able to enroll in studies. Currently, unfortunately, there are a number of studies that any given patient can participate in. And what I am impressed by is that the willingness and the huge effort that a lot of the sponsors are putting forth to enroll non-ambulatory patients. In the past, it has always been that they're targeting the ambulatory patients and the younger kids, but now it appears that sponsors are realizing, hey, let's do some studies for the older patients. And so of course their endpoints measurements are going to be different in the younger age group versus the older age group. However, there is now trials that are available for older patients. So I think that's reassuring.
Absolutely. Is there any interference with getting the COVID vaccine in either study?
I don't think so. No, I think if you are in the study, it is recommended that you don't get the COVID vaccine so close in proximity to your infusion. But as far as getting COVID vaccine is highly encouraged.
Is there any update on Regen bio study?
I think it's still ongoing, and they're currently collecting data, and hopefully we will hear some kind of approval hopefully soon. But I don't think that currently, I don't believe it's currently open for enrollment.
Okay. Another, I think I just want to make a comment on that touch point is, as for, parents, caregivers, families that are watching this, individuals, go on companies' websites, like their Facebook pages, their Instagram, sign up for their newsletters, things like that. Those are great ways to stay up to date with the companies and be notified when they release results or information about their studies.
Absolutely.
Then I have another question. Is there any trial studying taking exon 2 shipping medications?
Would you clarify that question for me?
Okay, let's see. Is there any trial studying taking 2 exon skipping medications?
Oh, I don't think so, but I believe Columbus Nationwide is studying exon 2 therapy currently, but at this time, I don't believe so.
Okay. What should we consider when considering a gene therapy study? Can we participate in other studies post the gene therapy study?
I think that gene therapy is a great promise to the future of therapy and treatments for our patients. Unfortunately, most sponsors that I know and most study protocol that I've read exclude patients who have already received gene therapy. Now that may change in the future as we have more patients in gene therapy and more patients receiving gene therapy. But for now, I would say most, if not all studies, would exclude patients who previously received gene therapy. For the spinal muscular atrophy, in which there is gene therapy available, some of the other therapy and other trials are now letting those patients in simply because there's more of those patients that are available. But I think for Duchenne's now, everything that's currently in clinical trials are not allowed if you receive gene therapy. And I think if you have received gene therapy and you are in a clinical trial for gene therapy, you should theoretically still be in that study unless you withdrew from it, and simply just to follow up for any long-term effects or any potential side effects that could come from the gene therapy treatment.
What do you find is the most effective way for families to learn about all clinical trials available?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where do you go and where do you start, right? I think working in rare disease space, Duchenne's is probably the most robust patient advocacy group. You guys have such an amazing community of parents, patients, friends and families. So I think that for Duchenne's, their patient advocacy group is probably the first place I go. And there's a number of patient advocacy group, Jet Foundations and other places. Clinical trials is also a good source to go to. It's rather a bit challenging to navigate if you're new to the space. But also, talk to your physicians, talk to your treating neurologist. They may know and they may have a clinical trial that's currently at the site that you're not aware of. So I would ask your doctor, I would ask your neurologist, your colleagues, and people who you're connected with on social media, and of course, patient advocacy group always have extremely important and useful information for you to look at as well.
Okay, great. You mentioned endpoints earlier. How reliable are they?
That's a $1 million question. I think everyone who's doing clinical research and clinical trials are still trying to figure out what is the correct and the most relevant endpoint to measure. So, you have the functional assessments. So those are 6-minute walk test, North Star ambulatory, 10-meter walk run. So those are your functional assessment. Other studies in the older populations are gearing and looking at pulmonary function test. But there are other measurements, endpoints that are also important as well, and those are called surrogate or biomarkers, and those are muscle biopsy, whether it be open or needle biopsy. So that's also endpoint as well. There's been some really innovative measure and endpoint measurements, such as the Casimir group, where they do video assessments and to document progressions of condition in patients. So our hope is that we can identify one endpoint, but I think at this point, most study will try to capture a lot of those endpoints, hoping that they could catch a signal or see some improvement in some of these endpoints that potentially could help to get the drug approved.
Are there any endpoints I could measure in my son's diagnosis that are outside of clinical trials?
Yeah, I think so. Depending on your clinic, some MD clinic would probably have a physical therapist, and most places would measure things such as 10-meter walk run, North Star ambulatory, 6-minute walk test, grip strength, pulmonary function test, echocardiogram. So those are what you can do outside of clinical trials. And there's also natural history studies that you can enroll in, and that can document the natural progression of your child if your child's not in any clinical trials. So those are across the board similar and well-known functional outcome measure that you can follow for your child's progression.
Okay. My son is currently losing ambulation. We are hopeful for him to participate in a trial, but nervous at the appointment they will classify him as non-ambulatory. Any advice?
So depending on the study you're trying to get into, they have, loss of ambulation is rather, you would think that it's a clean and clear-cut definition, but sometimes it's not. So if you can walk around the house, does that mean you've lost your ambulation? If you can walk 100 meter or 200 meter on 6-minute walk test, does that mean that you're non-ambulatory? So the definitions of loss of ambulation is relative, and it all depends on certain studies. So I think depending on the study that you are interested in, on clinicaltrial.gov or on some of the patient advocacy web pages, I think there should be some details and some clear inclusion or exclusion criteria that you can assess and can kind of plan for. But it all depends on the study on how loss of ambulation is defined.
At what point does a biotech firm submit results to the FDA and request approval? For example, with FibroGen is stage 3 trial for 1 year. Does FibroGen request approval after that, assuming results are positive?
It depends on how many patients is enrolled, and whether the efficacy of the therapy is overwhelming. Not necessarily for Duchenne's, but in typical study, if they do have overwhelming results and data, without fully enrolling the study, they can potentially stop the study and submit to FDA for approval. But it all depends on the number of patients enrolled in order to make their data be strong and robust. So if FibroGen enroll everyone that they have intended to enroll within a year and get good data in a year, yes, then they can probably submit to FDA. So it all depends on the plan and what the outlines of the protocol has indicated for each of the study.
Okay. What are eligible for exon skip? We are eligible for exon skipping, but waiting for gene therapy study to start. Should we continue to wait it
out? Meaning not being on exon skipping therapy?
They're eligible for exon skipping, but waiting for the gene therapy trial to start. Should they continue to wait it out?
Okay. So in this landscape, it's highly unpredictable when any gene therapy will start. And even if it starts, there's always a bit of a washout period. So particularly for some of the ongoing study right now, there's, I believe, if I remember correctly from the last time I've read on clinicaltrial.gov, there may be a 3 months washout period, and don't quote me on that, but there's a washout period in which, let's say if your child get on exon skipping therapy and gene therapy is opening up and they're gearing up for enrollment, your child can potentially stop taking the exon skipping therapy and wait out for their washout period. So that's always a potential and an option. But I think that because it's unpredictable right now, I would keep your child on exon skipping therapy for the time being.
Okay, great. Are there any updates on CRISPR-9?
So there has been very promising animal data on CRISPR-9, and they have implemented this therapy in some of the human blood disorders. But currently in Duchenne, it's still in sort of preclinical phase. I'm hoping to see that they open it up soon, but currently it's still in the preclinical phase, which means it's still in the animal testing period.
Next question we have, how long do gene therapy studies go for?
Again, it depends on the study. You know, the hypothesis is, or the thought of it is, ideally you should get one dose of gene therapy, and that should cure your child of Duchenne. So this phenomenon is called durability. So the questions around whether a patient receives just one dose or do they get multiple doses, kind of like the vaccine where you get boosters. And that's still an ongoing discussion because when you have received a gene therapy dose, then your viral antibody will be higher. And so given an extra dose or a second dose of gene therapy may cause a unwanted immune response to the second gene therapy dosing. So there's a lot of considerations that go into thinking about getting a second gene therapy dosing, but it's an ongoing discussion surrounding the durability of the gene therapy treatments.
Okay. Are there any medications recently approved for Duchenne patients to take for various conditions?
So the current approved therapies are either exon specific or mutation specific, or they help with the overall health or the kind of. So I guess what I'm referring to is steroids, like things like deflazacort. Those are therapies that doesn't necessarily target specific mutation, and it will help to slow down the disease progression. Of course, the specific exon skipping therapy depends on the mutation that your child has. So if he doesn't meet the criteria in genetic mutations for, let's say, exon 45 skipping therapy, then they shouldn't be getting it. And I think insurance may not necessarily approve for that. They're fairly stringent and really watch out for the appropriate patients rather than giving it to any patients, which understandably so.
Okay. Are there any updates on the Ppmo study in Sarepta that has been on hold?
Yeah, it's been a slow progression in this study. It was put on hold late last year, and continued to be on hold as of today. I think behind the scene, there's been ongoing discussion with FDA and protocol revision, primarily to ensure that there's no other adverse events that need to be closely monitored. And I believe the target date for resuming that would likely be later this year, if not early next year.
Have you heard any talk about doing nanoparticles instead of virus-based microdystrophin gene therapy?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I don't think it's in clinical phase yet. I think it's still in preclinical phase from what I read last. But I think there's a number of ways to that scientists and researchers are looking at to deliver gene therapy and trying to circumvent the viral titers. So I believe that the result of that we will hear from that in the near future.
Okay. We have another question. If I'm looking for my son to participate in a clinical trial, but it's not available at our hospital, how do we go to another hospital that does have it?
Yeah, I think so. This is where you go on clinicaltrial.gov or you contact the sponsor to ask if there is a site near you. And if you go on clinicaltrial.gov, of course, put in the diagnosis terminology and the region that you're in, and that will provide you with some of the close by sites that you could be considered a candidate for. Most, and I would say most, if not all, centers will accept patients from different clinics, simply because the sponsor could not open various sites at different clinics. So they strategically aim for certain sites that are easy to get to or has a large populations of Duchenne's patients. So their best bet would be either talk to your neurologist who can help you to do the search, or go on clinicaltrial.gov and look for a site that would potentially be closest to you.
All right, and the next one after that one is, does it matter what type of health insurance I have to participate in a clinical trial?
No, it should not.
All right, here's another one. In one of your slides, it looked like one of the gene therapy trials showed reduced effect. Sorry, I don't remember the slide, maybe Sarepta. Can you clarify if the reduced result, 20% or so, is from the patient's original state or from the first dose, 60% or so? In other words, has the patient's improvement dropped?
I think that so there's ongoing analysis of data, and some of the data that's presented probably has old data, where a lot of times, especially for gene therapy, you have to monitor over a long period of time. But it appears that for some of the gene therapy, there has been an increase in dystrophin expression, whether it by immunofluorescence or other means of assay. And because there's only so many times you can do muscle biopsy on a patient, most of the study will allow for pre-dosing and then a certain period of time after dosing, whether it be 3 months, 6 months, or a year after dosing. So you get probably just 2 point in time. Some study will require a third one, but for the most part, you only get pre-dosing and post-dosing at certain time interval.
Okay, great. All right, this is one of the last ones we have here, which I think is a great one. If a family has multiple children impacted, is there a benefit to having them enrolled in different trials or the same one?
I think you pick what is best for you and your family, also depending on your child's age, mutations, and functional status. It is probably easier to enroll into one specific study, simply so that it's easier to keep up with. But, all of your, however many children you have that are affected, may not necessarily fit into one particular study. But it is challenging and logistically difficult to enroll in multiple study and having different schedule and different visit. You know, if you can pull it off, great. But it is challenging. I think it's challenging to just participate in one study. I can't imagine in multiple study, but it's doable if you have the support, and you know, and your child would meet the inclusion criteria for different studies.
Are there newer studies coming out next year that we should be aware about?
I don't know about next year, but there are studies that are in the pipeline that are targeting either exon skipping or general non-specific mutations. So there is, I think, with the approval of several therapies in the recent years, has prompted a lot of motivations in other companies to study Duchenne. So I'm not sure about next year, but in the near future, yes.
And then as a newly diagnosed parent, what are some questions I should be asking about before enrolling into a gene therapy study?
That's a great question. So I think one of the questions to look into is for any gene therapy study, one, are they opened and are they enrolling? Two, if they are, does your child's age fit for that specific study? And lastly, and they will always ask this, would be, and depending on the gene therapy, but for the ones that are currently available, they would definitely ask for viral titers. And this could be a part of your screening process, or in some clinic, they're now drawing viral titers for patients who are interested in finding out.
My neurologist doesn't seem that informed about trials. Do you recommend me sending him somewhere to learn more?
So it's clinical trials is a bit tricky in that unless you're actively involved in it, sometimes it's hard to keep up with so many studies that are ongoing. You don't necessarily need to take your child to a different clinic to learn more about clinical trials. You know, there are resources and different clinicians that you can consult with. And I've been really impressed with the community and the families. You guys are so well read and so up to date with some of these studies. So I think it may not necessarily involve in taking your child to a different clinic. I would start with just your community and your patient advocacy group and go from there. Given the pandemic and some of the restrictions and travels, that may not necessarily be a good first choice for you to do. But definitely reach out to patient advocacy groups, your social media, and some of the families that are well read and well up to date. I think they can provide a lot of good resources for you to start out with. Then if you were to determine and identify a study that you think would be potentially good for your child, then bring that study and discuss that with your neurologist. So I think that would be a little bit easier path to start than traveling to a completely new clinic.
Yeah. This is that kind of leads into travel. The next question, do any of the trials offer home visits or infusions? Traveling a lot already for my son's appointments. Don't want to add another one in.
Sure. Most of the studies, if not all of the infusion study, are now looking into home health infusion, or if they haven't, they have already implemented it. So yes, there's been a huge effort in making things easier for patients and their family to participate in clinical trials. And if it's to ease the burden of traveling, home health is available. However, there is a short period of time initially that you need to get your medications while you're in a clinic or in a hospital, simply to monitor for any side effects or any immediate where immediate intervention can be provided.
Another question. My doctor talked to me about gene therapy, but when I talked to other Duchenne moms, they brought up the fact we can't enroll into another trial after participating. Is that actually true?
For now, yes. If you have participated or have received gene therapy, then that in all likelihood would exclude you from most of the ongoing study currently.
Okay. All right. How can I have my child see you?
You can reach out to us. We, through webpage, or Danielle knows how to get in touch with me. But we do have a webpage, and there should be our contact information on there.
All right, well, I think that's about it for questions. I think that was a great amount of questions we had, and thank you so much for answering all those. As Dr. Han just said, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to her at the Rare Disease Research Unit or to Jet Foundation. We're happy to, provide you any contacts or any other questions you may have forward over to her. But I think that was a fantastic presentation. And again, thank you all that you do for our Duchenne community. We love working with you, and I'm so grateful for this today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right, everyone, thanks again for joining. We had a great turnout today. Thanks for all celebrating our World Duchenne Awareness Day event with us. We really appreciate it. Keep posting your photos and hashtagging Stronger Than Duchenne. We hope to see you very soon, and this will be recorded and available live on our website in the next day or so. With that closing, have a great day and talk to you all soon. Bye.